Chapter 1 The Power of Thought. The man who thought his way into partnership with Thomas A. Edison. Truly, thoughts are things, and powerful things at that, when mixed with purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for their translation into riches or other material objects. Edwin C. Barnes discovered how true it is that men really do think and grow rich. His discovery did not come about at one sitting. It came little by little, beginning with a burning desire to become a business associate of the great Thomas Edison. One of the chief characteristics of Barnes' desire was that it was definite. He wanted to work with Edison, not for him. Observe carefully the description of how he went about translating his desire into reality, and you will have a better understanding of the 13 principles which lead to riches. When this desire or impulse of thought first flashed into his mind, he was in no position to act upon it. Two difficulties stood in his way. He did not know Mr. Edison, and he did not have enough money to pay his rail fare to Orange, New Jersey. These difficulties were sufficient to have discouraged the majority of people from making any attempt to carry out the desire. But his was no ordinary desire. He was so determined to find a way to carry out his desire that he finally decided to travel by blind baggage rather than be defeated. He presented himself at Mr. Edison's laboratory and announced he had come to go into business with the inventor. In speaking of the first meeting between them, years later, Mr. Edison said, "He stood there before me, looking like an ordinary tramp, but there was something in the expression of his face which conveyed the impression that he was determined to get what he had come after. I had learned from years of his experience with men that when a man really desires a thing so deeply that he is willing to stake his entire future on a single turn of the wheel in order to get it, he is sure to win. I gave him the opportunity he asked for, because I saw he had made up his mind to stand by until he succeeded. Subsequent events proved that no mistake was made. Just what young Barnes said to Mr. Edison on that occasion was far less important than what he thought. Edison himself said so. It could not have been the young man's appearance that got him his start in the Edison office, for that was definitely against him. It was what he thought that counted. If the significance of this statement could be conveyed to every person who reads it, there would be no need for the remainder of this book. Barnes did not get his partnership with Edison on his first interview. He did get a chance to work with Edison in the Edison offices at a very nominal wage, doing work that was unimportant to Edison, but most important to Barnes. It gave him an opportunity to display his merchandise where his intended partner could see it. Months went by. Apparently, nothing happened to bring the coveted goal which Barnes had set up in his mind as his definite major purpose. But something important was happening in Barnes' mind. He was constantly intensifying his desire to become the business associate of Edison. Psychologists have correctly said, when one is truly ready for a thing, it puts in its appearance. Barnes was ready for a business association with Edison. Moreover, he was determined to remain ready until he got that which he was seeking. He did not say to himself, "Ah well, what's the use? I guess I'll change my mind and try for a salesman job." But he did say, "I came here to go in business with Edison, and I'll accomplish this end if it takes the remainder of my life." He meant it. What a different story people would have to tell if only they would adopt a definite purpose and stand by that purpose until it had time to become an all-consuming obsession. Maybe young Barnes did not know at the time, but his bulldog determination, his persistence with a single desire, was destined to mow down all opposition and bring him the opportunity he was seeking. When the opportunity came, it appeared in a different form, and from a different direction than Barnes had expected. That is one of the tricks of opportunity. It has a sly habit of slipping in by the back door and often comes disguised in the form of misfortune or temporary defeat. Perhaps this is why so many fail to recognize opportunity. Mr. Edison had just perfected a new office device, known at that time as the Edison dictating machine, later called the Ediphone. His salesmen were not enthusiastic over the machine. They did not believe it could be sold without great effort. Barnes saw his opportunity. It had crawled in quietly, hidden in a queer-looking machine that had interested no one but Barnes and the inventor. Barnes knew he could sell the Edison dictating machine. He suggested this to Edison and promptly got his chance. He did sell the machine. In fact, he sold it so successfully that Edison gave him a contract to distribute and market all over the nation. Out of that business association grew the slogan, "Made by Edison and installed by Barnes." This business alliance made Barnes rich in money, but he accomplished something infinitely greater. He proved that one really may think and grow rich. How much actual cash that original desire of Barnes was worth to him, I have no way of knowing. Perhaps it brought him $2 or $3 million. Whatever the amount, it becomes insignificant when compared with the greater asset he acquired, the definite knowledge that an intangible impulse of thought can be transmuted into its physical counterpart by the application of known principles. Barnes literally thought himself into a partnership with the great Edison. He thought himself into a fortune. He had nothing to start with except the capacity to know what he wanted, and the determination to stand by that desire until he realized it. He had no money to begin with. He had but little education. He had no influence, but he did have initiative, faith, and the will to win. With these intangible forces, he made himself number one man, with the greatest inventor who ever lived. Now, let us look at a different situation and study a man who had plenty of tangible evidence of riches, but lost it because he stopped 3 feet short of the goal he was seeking. 3 feet from gold. One of the most common causes of failure is the habit of quitting when one is overtaken by temporary defeat. Every person is guilty of this mistake at one time or another. R.U. Darby, who later became one of the most successful insurance salesmen in the country, tells the story of his uncle who was caught by the gold fever in the gold rush days and went west to dig and grow rich. He had never heard the saying that more gold has been mined from the brains of men than has ever been taken from the earth. He staked a claim and went to work with pick and shovel. The going was hard, but his lust for gold was definite. After weeks of labor, he was rewarded by the discovery of the shining ore. He needed machinery to bring the ore to the surface. Quietly, he covered up the mine, retraced his footsteps to his home in Williamsburg, Maryland, and told his relatives and a few neighbors of the strike. They got together money for the needed machinery and had it shipped. The uncle and Darby went back to work the mine. The first car of ore was mined and shipped to a smelter. The returns proved that they had one of the richest mines in Colorado. A few more cars of that ore would clear the debts. Then would come the big killing and profits. Down went the drills, up went the hopes of Darby and Uncle. Then something happened. The vein of gold ore disappeared. They had come to the end of the rainbow, and the pot of gold was no longer there. They drilled on, desperately trying to pick up the vein again, all to no avail. Finally, they decided to quit. They sold the machinery to a junk man for a few $100s and took the train back home. Some junk men are dumb, but not this one. He called in a mining engineer to look at the mine and do a little calculating. The engineer advised that the project had failed because the owners were not familiar with fault lines. His calculations showed that the vein would be found just 3 feet from where Darby's had stopped drilling. That is exactly where it was found. The junk man took millions of dollars in ore from the mine because he knew enough to seek expert counsel before giving up. Most of the money which went into the machinery was procured through the efforts of R.U. Darby, who was then a very young man. The money came from his relatives and neighbors because of their faith in him. He had paid back every dollar of it, although he was years in doing so. Long afterwards, Mr. Darby recouped his loss many times over when he made the discovery. Long afterwards, Mr. Darby recouped his loss many times over when he had made the discovery that desire can be transmuted into gold. The discovery came after when he went into business of selling life insurance. Remembering that he lost a huge fortune because he stopped 3 feet from gold, Darby profited by the experience in his chosen work. His simple method was to say to himself, I stopped 3 feet from gold, but I will never stop because men say no when I ask them to buy insurance. He owes his stickability to the lesson he learned from his quitability in the gold mining business. Before success comes to most people, they are sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure. When faced with defeat, the easiest and most logical thing to do is to quit. That is exactly what the majority of people do. More than 500 of the most successful people America has ever known told the author their greatest success came just one step beyond the point at which defeat had overtaken them. Failure is a trickster with a keen sense of irony and cunning. It takes great delight in tripping one up when success is almost within reach. A 50-cent lesson in persistence. Shortly after Mr. Darby received his degree from the University of Hard Knocks and had decided to profit by his experience in the gold mining business, he had the good fortune to be present on an occasion that proved to him that no does not necessarily mean no. One afternoon, he was helping his uncle grind wheat in an old-fashioned mill. The uncle operated a large farm on which a number of sharecrop farmers lived. Quietly, the door was opened, and a small child, the daughter of a tenant, walked in and took her place near the door. The uncle looked up and saw the child, and barked at her roughly. "What do you want?" Meekly, the child replied, "My mommy says, send her 50 cents. "I'll not do it," the uncle retorted. "Now you run on home." "Yes, sir," the child replied, but she did not move. The uncle went ahead with his work, so busily engaged he did not notice the child had not left. When he looked up and saw her still standing there, he yelled at her, "I told you to go on home. Now go, or I'll take a switch to you." The little girl said, "Yes, sir," but did not budge an inch. The uncle dropped a sack of grain he was about to pour into the mill hopper, picked up a barrel stave, and started towards the child with an expression on his face that indicated trouble. Darby held his breath. He was certain he was about to witness a murder. He knew his uncle had a fierce temper. When the uncle reached the spot where the child was standing, she quickly stepped forward one step, looking up into his eyes, and screamed at the top of her shrill voice, "My mommy's gotta have that 50 cents. The uncle stopped, looked at her for a minute, then slowly laid the barrel stave on the floor, put his hands in his pocket, took out $50 and gave it to her. The child took the money and slowly backed towards the door, never taking her eyes off the man whom she had just conquered. After she had gone, the uncle sat down on a box and looked out the window into space for more than 10 minutes. He was pondering with awe on the whipping he had just taken. Mr. Darby, too, was doing some thinking. That was the first time in all his experience that he had seen a child of a sharecropper deliberately master an adult authority figure. How did she do it? What happened to his uncle that caused him to lose his fierceness and become as docile as a lamb? What strange power did this child use that made her master over her superior? These and other similar questions flashed into Darby's mind, but he did not find the answer until years later, when he told me the story. Strangely, the story of this unusual experience was told to the author in the old mill, on the very spot where the uncle took his whipping. As we stood there in that musty old mill, Mr. Darby repeated the story of the unusual conquest, and finished by asking, "What can you make of it? What strange power did that child use that so completely whipped my uncle?" The answer to his question will be found in the principles described in this book. The answer is full and complete. It contains details and instructions sufficient to enable anyone to understand and apply the same force that the little child accidentally stumbled upon. Keep your mind alert, and you will observe exactly what strange power came to the rescue of the child. You will catch a glimpse of this power in the next chapter. Somewhere in the book, you will find an idea that will quicken your receptive powers and place at your command for your own benefit. This same irresistible power, the awareness of this power, may come to you in the first chapter, or it may flash into your mind in some subsequent chapter. It may come in the form of a single idea, or it may come in the nature of a plan or a purpose. Again, it may cause you to go back into your past experiences of failure or defeat and bring you to the surface some lesson by which you can regain all that you lost through defeat. After I had described to Mr. Darby the power unwittingly used by the little child, he quickly retraced his 30 years of experience as a life insurance salesman. He frankly acknowledged that his success in that field was due in no small degree to the lesson he had learned from the child. Mr. Darby pointed out, every time a prospect tried to bow me out without buying, I saw that child standing there in the old mill, her big eyes glaring in defiance, and I said to myself, I've got to make this sale. The better portion of all sales I have made were made after people had said no. He recalled, too, his mistake in having stopped only 3 feet from gold, but he said that experience was a blessing in disguise. It taught me to keep on keeping on, no matter how hard the going may be, a lesson I needed to learn before I could succeed in anything. This story of Mr. Darby and his uncle, the sharecropper's child, and the gold mine will doubtless be read by hundreds of people who make their living by selling life insurance. To all of these, the author wishes to offer the suggestion that Darby owes to these 2 experiences his ability to sell more than $1 million of life insurance every year. Life is strange and often imponderable. Both the successes and the failures have their roots in simple experiences. Mr. Darby's experiences were commonplace and simple enough, yet as they held the answer to his destiny in life, they were as important to him as life itself. He profited by these 2 dramatic experiences because he analyzed them and found the lesson they taught. But what of the person who has neither the time nor the inclination to study failure in search of knowledge that may lead to success? Where and how are they to learn the art of converting defeat into stepping stones to opportunity? The answer called for a description of 13 principles. However, remember as you read that the answer you may be seeking to the questions which have caused you to ponder over the strangeness of life may be found in your own mind. Some idea, plan, or purpose may spring into your mind as you read. One sound idea is all you need to achieve success. The principles described in this book contain the best and most practical ways and means of creating useful ideas. Before we go any further in our approach to the description of these principles, we believe you are entitled to receive this important suggestion. When riches begin to come, they come so quickly in such great abundance that one wonders where they have been hiding during all those lean years. This is an astounding statement, and all the more so when we take into consideration the popular belief that riches come only to those who work hard and long. When you begin to think and grow rich, you will observe that riches begin with a state of mind, with definiteness of purpose, with little or no hard work. You and every other person ought to be interested in knowing how to acquire a state of mind that will attract riches. I spent 25 years in research, analyzing more than 25,000 people, because I too wanted to know how wealthy men become that way. Without that research, this book could have not been written. Here, take notice of a very significant truth. The business depression started in 1929 and continued on an all-time record of destruction until someone after President Roosevelt entered office. Then the depression began to fade into nothingness, just as an electrician in a theater raises the light so gradually that the darkness is transmuted into light before you realize it. So did the spell of fear in the minds of people gradually fade away and become faith. As soon as you master the principles of this philosophy and begin to follow the instructions for applying those principles, your financial status will begin to improve. Everything you touch will begin to transmute itself into an asset for your benefit. Impossible? Not at all. One of the main weaknesses of mankind is the average person's familiarity with the word impossible. He knows all the rules that will not work. He knows all the things that cannot be done. This book was written for those who seek the rules that have made others successful and are willing to stake everything on those rules. A great many years ago, I purchased a fine dictionary. The first thing I did was turn to the word impossible and neatly clip it out of the book. That would not be an unwise thing for you to do. Success comes to those who become success conscious. Failure comes to those who indifferently allow themselves to become failure conscious. The object of this book is to help all who seek it learn the art of changing their minds from failure consciousness to success consciousness. Another weakness found in altogether too many people is the habit of measuring everything and everyone by their own impressions and beliefs. Some who read this will believe that no one can think and grow rich. They cannot think in terms of riches because their thought habits have been steeped in poverty, want, misery, failure, and defeat. Millions of people look at the achievements of Henry Ford and envy him his good fortune, or luck, or genius, or whatever it is they credit for Ford's fortune. Perhaps one person in every 100,000 knows the secret of Ford's success, and those who do know are too modest or too reluctant to speak of it because of its simplicity. A single transaction will illustrate the secret perfectly. When Ford decided to produce his now famous V8 motor, he chose to build an engine with the entire 8 cylinders cast in one block, and instructed his engineers to produce a design for the engine. The design was placed on paper, but the engineers believed it was simply impossible to cast an 8-cylinder gas engine block in one piece. Ford said, "Produce it anyway." But, they replied, "It's impossible." "Go ahead," Ford commanded, "and stay on the job until you succeed, no matter how much time is required." The engineers went ahead. There was no other option if they were to remain on the Ford staff. 6 months went by and nothing happened. Another 6 months passed, and still nothing. The engineers tried every conceivable plan to carry out the orders, but the thing seemed out of the question, impossible. At the end of the year, Ford checked with his engineers, and again they informed him that they had found no way to carry out his orders. "Go right ahead," said Ford. "I want it, and I'll have it." They went ahead, and then, as if by a stroke of magic, the secret is discovered. The Ford determination had won once more. This story may not be described with minute accuracy, but the sum and substance of it is correct. Deduce from it, you who wish to think and grow rich, the secret of the Ford millions, if you can. You'll not have to look very far. Henry Ford is a success because he understands and applies the principles of success. One of these is desire, knowing what one wants. Remember this Ford story as you read, and pick out the lines in which the secret of his stupendous achievement has been described. If you can do this, if you can lay your finger on the particular group of principles that made Henry Ford rich, you can equal his achievements in almost any calling for which you are suited. The Henry Ford of the late 20th century was Bill Gates. Just as Ford revolutionized the transportation industry by creating a car that almost anyone could afford and drive, Bill Gates transformed the computer industry by designing software that enabled everybody, not just the specialized technocrats, to be able to use computers, and later making the personal computer a virtual necessity in every office, school, and home. This resulted in Bill Gates accruing billions of dollars and becoming the richest man in America. He first became entranced with the computers and began programming them at the age of 13. In 1973, he entered Harvard University, where he lived down the hall from Steve Ballmer, now Microsoft's chief executive officer. While at Harvard, Gates developed a version of the programming language, BASIC, for the first microcomputer. Gates was so absorbed in his dream of building a software company that he left Harvard to devote his energies to fulfilling it. A few years earlier, he and his childhood friend Paul Allen had formed a company, Microsoft, as the vehicle for this endeavor. Guided by a belief that the computer would be a valuable tool on every office desktop and in every home, they began developing software for personal computers. Gates' foresight in his vision for personal computing have been central to the success of Microsoft and the software industry. Having achieved his major goal, Bill Gates continued to pursue his new goals both in the business of creating ever-improving computer programs and in his philanthropic work, having founded with his wife, Melinda, the largest charitable foundation in the world. You are the master of your fate, the captain of your soul. When the English poet W.C. Henley wrote the prophetic lines, "I am the master of my fate, and I am the captain of my soul," he should have informed us that the reason we are the masters of our fate, the captains of our souls, is because we have the power to control our thoughts. He should have told us that the ether in which this little planet flows, in which we move and have our being, is a form of energy moving at an inconceivably high rate of vibration, and that the ether is filled with a form of universal power which adapts itself to the nature of the thoughts we hold in our minds and influences us in natural ways to transmute our thoughts into their physical equivalent. If the poet had told us of this great truth, we would know why it is that we are the masters of our fate, the captains of our souls. He should have told us with great emphasis that this power makes no attempt to discriminate between destructive and constructive thoughts, that it will urge us to translate into physical reality thoughts of poverty just as quickly as it will influence us to act upon thoughts of riches. He should have told us, too, that our brains become magnetized with the dominating thoughts we hold in our minds. By means with which no one is familiar, these magnets attract to us the forces, the people, the circumstances of life which harmonize with the nature of our dominating thoughts. He should have told us that before we can accumulate riches in great abundance, we must magnetize our minds with the intense desire for riches, that we must become money conscious until the desire for money drives us to create definite plans for acquiring it. But being a poet and not a philosopher, Henley contented himself by stating a great truth in poetic form, leaving those who followed him to interpret the philosophical meaning of his lines. Little by little, the truth has unfolded itself, until it now appears certain that the principles described in this book hold the secret of mastery over our economic fate. Another man who exemplifies being master of his fate is Steven Spielberg, one of the all-time great motion picture directors. He dreamed of being a movie director from childhood. He began making amateur films with a primitive camera when he was still a child, and the dream never subsided. How Spielberg broke into the Universal Studios is a legend in the movie industry. He took the Universal Studios tour, an attraction that enables visitors to get an inside look at the movie business. Visitors ride around the studio's lots on a tram. Steven sneaked off the tram and hid between two sound stages until the tour ended. When he left at the end of the day, he made a point of saying a few words to the gate guard. Day after day, he went back to the studio for 3 months. He walked past the guard, waved at him, and he waved back. He always wore and carried a briefcase, letting the guard assume he was one of the students with a summer job in the studio. He made a point of speaking to and befriending directors, writers, and editors. He even found a vacant office, took it over, and listed his name in the building directory. He made it his business to get to know Sid Sheinberg, then head of production for the studio's television arm. He showed him his college film project, which so impressed Sheinberg that he put the young man under contract with the studio. His first full-length film, The Sugarland Express, received critical acclaim and won a Best Screenplay award at the 1974 Cannes Film Festival. Unfortunately, it did not do very well at the box office. His big break came a year later when he discovered the book Jaws. The studio had already decided to produce Jaws and had chosen a well-known director to film it. Spielberg desperately wanted to make this movie. Despite the financial failure of the Sugarland Express, his self-confidence had not diminished, and he persuaded the producers to dismiss the chosen director and give the film to him. It was not an easy assignment. From the beginning, trouble beset the production. It ran into technical and budget problems. However, when Jaws was released in June 1975, it enjoyed twofold success. It broke box office records and the critics loved it. Within a month of its release, the film had taken in $60 million at the box office, an unheard of amount at that time. Over the next few years, Spielberg directed several movies, including the popular Indiana Jones series, the award-winning Color Purple, Empire of the Sun, and E.T. He later directed Jurassic Park, which would also become, at its time, the most successful movie in history, the third Spielberg film to break the record. It also brought in over $1 billion in gross receipts, toys, and other merchandise. Spielberg continues to pursue his dreams. When he and two other Hollywood moguls created their own production company, they called it DreamWorks. We are now ready to examine the first of these principles. Maintain a spirit of open-mindedness. Remember as you read that they are the invention of no single person. The principles were gathered from the life experiences of more than 500 men who actually accumulated riches in huge amounts, men who began in poverty with little education or influence. The principles worked for these men. You can put them to work for your own enduring benefit. You'll find it easy, not hard to do. Before you read the next chapter, I want you to know that it conveys factual information that might easily change your entire financial destiny, as it has so definitely brought changes of stupendous proportions to two people described. I want you to know also that the relationship between these two men and myself is such that I could have taken no liberties with the facts, even if I had wished to do so. One of them has been my closest personal friend for almost 25 years. The other is my own son. The unusual success of these two men, success that they generously accredit to the principle described in the next chapter, more than justifies this personal reference as a means of emphasizing the far-flung power of this principle.